And we're back. Hello, y'all. I hope you're having a good time. Isn't Alicyn a fantastic guest? This has been such a great conversation so far. Let's bring her back on and ask your questions and talk about the most important thing, TransPride Pittsburgh and the conference. Welcome back, Alicyn.
Hi, good to be back.
Okay, so they've got your questions grabbed here from the audience. I didn't see a ton of come in, but I know there are a few, so let's go ahead and jump into those. And then we'll get into all of the amazing things that you do. What was the biggest culture shock from you from moving from South Africa to the United States?
I think my answer will surprise you. There wasn't any. I mean, you have to understand that the part of, I grew up in a fairly Anglicized part of South Africa, the southernmost part. And we were just a microcosm of largely Western US influenced culture. So, if you think about US culture and you add like a 5 to 10 year delay, that's kind of what I grew up in. There was some, British influence as well. The culture shock I experienced was the first time I went back after coming out of here. And it was pretty extreme. I mean, I felt like I was visiting another planet for a while.
Hmm.
And I've only been back a few times since, but each time it got a little bit easier. But yeah, it was going back that was the culture shock for me. And the only thing I can attribute to it is, the influence of American culture on me growing up.
Yeah, and I would think that, you move over to the United States, it's about 5 years ahead, probably moves a little bit faster then, or feels like it does at least. And once you kind of trip on the treadmill a little bit and get your feet under you for the way things are moving, then yeah, it would seem like you'd go back, and then it's like a whoa, going back in time a little bit.
I'll give you just a really brief example. So I left a world of cassette tapes and arrived in a world of CDs. That's kind of part of that shift.
Wow, that's a big one. I remember those days. Wow, there are so many kids in this audience that wouldn't know what cassettes were. Um, Mimi asked another question. What is your favorite movie?
I've seen a lot of movies. That was my favorite hobby growing up was watching movies. And I have a number of favorites, but for its emotional content, my favorite film is Seven Samurai. Not so much the main characters, but the peasants in that film. Akira Kurosawa is able to bring out so much emotion in his characters, even the minor ones, and that's always affected me. So it's one of my favorite films. Tried to watch it with my dad once, but 4 hours is a bit long for him.
And did your love of film, or did your, the amount of film that you watched kind of come from that period where you, like you said earlier, you literally couldn't do anything during the day?
But to an extent, I mean, it started when I was younger. I because I was suppressing myself so much, I didn't make a lot of friends, and they weren't very deep relationships. That's part of why being able to sort of step away and saying I don't really have any ties to this was easier for me. But I filled that time with we were in the rental period. Everybody rented back then, and we would rent multiple films a week, and I would just devour them one after the other. So there was a time when I'd pretty much seen everything that was to be seen. And my interest ranged, quite vastly. But yeah, I also, when I was, sort of stuck in places where I didn't have anything better to do, I spent a lot of time on the floor in an apartment, almost unfurnished apartment in Florida, watching black and white. I had a little TV box back then and watching cable and catching up then. So.
Wow. It's so funny that you mentioned those rental days and kind of burning through everything that the rental store had. I remember that we did that in my family, and developed a taste for terrible horror movies and just bad B movies. I mean, one of our favorite things to go and do was to find the greatest, most terrible Eric Roberts film, because he's got quite a library of those, and just go and laugh at how bad the writing and the acting and all the stunts are. It can be a good time when you've gone through all of the main library and get to dive into some of these deep catalog gems.
I mean, we had a fairly limited catalog. I mean, a lot of the blockbusters, of course, but you know, being a country that was a little bit behind the curve, we had 4 television channels, and only 2 of them had any English programming at any one time.
Hmm.
So that was very limiting. But you know, we had most of the Hollywood stuff. And to a much lesser extent British things, because you know I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and at that time Equity, which was the big artist union in the UK, had said we're not going to allow any of our products to go to South Africa. So we missed out on a big chunk of that at that point. But you know, I've made up for it since.
Yeah, America wouldn't do that. There's too much capitalism involved. Um, both Mimi and Midvani applaud your choice of Kurosawa as your favorite film.
I will say the Princess Bride is a close second.
Nice. That's a fun one. I love that one. Valerie83 says, the first 2 questions, just so you know, were by Mimi. Valerie asks, or makes the comment, super incredible story. And I specifically love the spelling of Alicyn, and I'm sure the story behind that because it's wonderful. A certain Left in the Leaves, I don't know if you know that username, but it's Justice Renee says, Alicyn is a very good friend. So excited for her to be on the show and for all the amazing things she has done for TransPride. She's jumping the gun on one thing here, so let me see what's the last thing. And then she comments, thanks for your friendship. Excited to edit this one and get it released.
Looking forward to that too.
So then the one that I skipped, it leads right into the next set of things that I wanted to talk about. What is TransPride? And we'll leave the second half for after that. What is TransPride, and what do you do with that organization?
So technically, TransPride, specifically TransPride Pittsburgh, it's a community-led community organization here in Pittsburgh. What we're talking about is the TransPride Conference, which is how we're tending to call it these days, although it's technically still the TransPride Pittsburgh Conference, but it's grown to a national level. What it is a collaboration between community organizations, primarily TransPride Pittsburgh and several other organizations, and healthcare institutions. In our case, UPMC, which is one of the big health systems here in Pennsylvania, Children's Hospital, which is where I work, and Weston Psychiatric Hospital, both of which see a large number of gender diverse and trans patients. We came together. Initially, it was Children's and Trans Pride back in 2015, and the decision to do a professional conference alongside a community conference. That was the original model. And then in 2020, we evolved into a combined conference, and we grew a much bigger 3-day event. So really what it is, it's a health and wellness focused conference that provides professional education to those working in healthcare and community content from and for the trans and gender diverse community, bringing them all together into a single shared space. We specifically center community in our work, even though I sort of represent the institutional side in this particular collaboration. And we also allow community members and their immediate caregivers full and free access with registration to all of the content that we have. And you know, we've grown from what was originally just a artistic talent showcase about 10 years ago that TransPride put on, to and the inclusion of, well, we have questions, maybe we should have a Q&A, maybe we should invite some healthcare professionals to do a Q&A, to this first collaboration between Children's Hospital and TransPride Pittsburgh, to a collaboration of multiple organizations and a national audience. And you know, the basic philosophy, which is something I've pushed since I got involved, is when we bring community together with the professionals, we can learn from each other and we develop better ideas. And I've seen that actually happen. I've seen that in the work that we do.
That's so beautiful. And how specifically, you just came through it through your work at the Children's Hospital?
Well, when I rebuilt my life in Pittsburgh and got involved in advocacy, I actually sort of came back to my younger self, and um, you know, that interest in healthcare specifically. I remember in my 20s specifically thinking, well, things are going to be so much better in 20 years. And I look forward to that and the advances that we will make. And finding, some 25 years later that things hadn't evolved nearly as much as I thought. And so I sort of set myself on a vector to intersect with healthcare. I initially joined something called the Tri-State Gender Collaborative, which is sort of a place where professionals and some community members from the Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, and West Virginia regions would come together roughly every 3 months to sort of talk about the state of trans care and the various initiatives people were having. And I was there as a attendee at the very first conference in 2015 and every year subsequently. So I had really been involved prior to my current work. And then I helped to co-found a trans-led organization that focused on peer support called TransBuddy Pittsburgh, based on an original idea, TransBuddy from Vanderbilt University. And that led directly to my job at Children's ultimately. And while I was still part of TransBuddy, I ended up on the planning committee for the first time. I actually had started to provide feedback and ideas the year before at the conclusion of the previous conference. And so one of the ways we grew before COVID was, personal outreach. And I happened to have relationships with certain people around the country, some certain surgeons. And, I said, well, let's just invite them. We don't have to be strictly regional. Let's get these experts in. And when we pulled in Western Psychiatric Hospital, who had been doing their own thing for 2020, we were planning a very large in-person conference. But of course, COVID happened. And so we had to suddenly switch to virtual. And we ended up going from, essentially 1 day professional, 1 day community to this 3 day mixed event where we'd had maybe 16 hours of content, usually in two tracks, to in 2020, 56 hours of content.
Wow.
A lot of that built through these direct relationships that either I already had or I developed. And of course, other members of the planning committee, other leaders in the hospitals, other community leaders, we all had our own personal connections. And then last year, we reached 80 hours of content, which was a little bit too much for our format. But essentially, they had said, well, how big is the Philly conference, which is the really large in-person event that everybody, I think, is aware of? They, in I think it was 2018 or 2019, they hit 10,000 people. And so, I'm working with leaders at Western Psychiatric Hospital who are like, well, why can't we do 10,000? I said, let's just start maybe with a few hundred, And so that's what we did. But this idea of let's make it better, let's make it bigger, let's reach more people, let's reach more community members, and let's bring the expert opinions, the expert knowledge from both the community and from the professional side together.
Mm-hmm.
That was really sort of my guiding principle. And it just so happened that it worked really well with my colleagues in TransPride, who we've become really, really close. So even though I work for the institution, I sort of represent the community and the institution at the same time.
Mm-hmm. You have so many hats that you wear in all of this. So what is easier for you to build, you feel, in this? Is it the more medical side or the community side? And then how do they feed each other as one grows in growing the other?
So that's the challenge, because it's easy to put on a conference. It's easy to bring in community if you allow them relatively free, in most cases, access. But to actually have that robust academic content where physicians and other medical professionals attend because they can get learning credit from it, that requires very specific outreach, and you have to understand how the academic world works, and you have to know who the leaders are. It's a bit of a challenge, and I actually, because most of the outreach I do is to other professionals, that's the side that I really put most of my effort into, because I do have a great partner, and hopefully you'll meet them at some point. in Lynn Sickler, who is co-chair of TransPride Pittsburgh, the organization, and one of the other co-chairs of the planning committee for this conference. And effectively, the two of us, with some assistance from a couple of other people, put on the entire thing. We all contribute to ideas of what subjects we want, who we would like to invite. And then I've sort of taken on the role in the last couple of years of going out and finding those people, or having an idea for a particular topic and going and creating the people who speak on that topic, by being embedded in, the international trans health community, which has a big presence on Facebook, or the gender affirming voice community, which I help moderate on Facebook as well. Mm-hmm. So we've gone out specifically seeking those people who have the loudest voices to some degree, but are also the most expert at talking about trans issues, talking about trans rights, and bringing them to our conference. Because really, it turned out the biggest thing that you needed to do was ask.
So what do you feel that are the sort of the key things that this conference offers the trans community or the trans medical community that others aren't doing?
So we've touched on that a little bit. As I said, the key is bringing these two related, the people who provide the care and the people who get the care together. I think that it helps professionals to actually know that there are trans people in the room and that they have to behave accordingly. In an ideal world, they know this, and this is how they, conduct themselves at all times. But practically speaking, that doesn't always happen. And so I think just that influence of there are community members here influences the way that people interact with each other and interact, how they learn. And I think community, although we are getting more and more connected, even when I first got to Pittsburgh, even the local community was very siloed. The organization that I work for is also very siloed. And it's been, a major feat to sort of start building connective tissue between all of these things. I don't think that what I know as a professional is well known outside of that space. There are a lot of other trans, non-binary, and other gender diverse professionals as well. And, there are large communities of online talking to each other. But I think there's a disconnect between that world and the community at large. I keep running into, I do a lot of work with parents, parents who think they're the only parents in the world who's had somebody come out to them. Maybe not the world, but certainly they feel very alone and very isolated. And they don't realize that there are large communities of parents and kids supporting one another. Trans people in areas where they don't have a gender program, or they don't know the trans community online, for example, just they must be the only person who's experiencing this, and they don't know how to even access care. I think this opportunity to learn directly from the people providing legal and advocacy content now in several other areas, I think it's just it's an ideal way to share that knowledge and actually, reassure people that the professionals are out there, that they're doing their jobs, and, that they are not giving in to all of the misinformation that's out there. I think just that communication and that knowledge and the opportunity to gain that knowledge firsthand is really what sets us apart.
What is some of the feedback that you've gotten from past events, from either some of those parents or some of those people that might have revealed something they weren't expecting when they came into it?
So some of that's been a little mixed. Generally speaking, our conference has gotten very positive feedback, both from professionals and community. And we've got some really exceptional feedback. There are community professionals who at one point said, I think this was at last year's conference, they'd never been to a better organized community focused conference before, But it was very interesting the first time that we had surgical content and we had parents, some of them very eager because, their kids are reaching an age where they think that might be an option for them. They were not prepared for the, shall we say, the graphical content in most surgeons' presentations. And so they were a bit shocked. And, that sort of led us to add content warnings to a lot of things. But we have been pleasantly surprised. the last couple of years, we've gotten fairly good metrics. A lot of the attendees are asked to fill out post conference surveys, and by and large, with one or two exceptions, the speakers we have chosen have been very highly rated, and the overall experience has been very highly rated as well. Sometimes the sort of feedback that we find useful is, who did they like the most? Who did they want to see more of? Are there any topic areas that they'd like us to focus on? And even though we have a broad wealth of content, there is always more, largely in the intersectional space.
In general, do you feel that the frankness that comes across with a medical conference like that, does that tend to help people with, coming to a place of acceptance, either of, their children or themselves?
I mean, to be fair, if there wasn't already a high level of acceptance, it's unlikely that people would be interested in going to this conference. So we tend to have people who are at least trying to learn. That's the big part. I'd certainly know that it's impacted the lives of a number of our parents. The folks that I work with directly, I've gotten feedback from them that, think this has really changed their perspectives on some things. Often it's been, we now have multiple keynotes. As we grow, we've added multiple keynotes, and we've been very specific about selecting keynotes who have lived experience. Sometimes it's been, very broad. We've had activists, we've had advocates, we've had musicians, we've had NCAA athletes. And when it's somebody who has an identity that is aligned with maybe the person's child, and they get to see this example of somebody who is growing and thriving, it really, really, impacts their, I guess, expectations or hopes for the future for their child. So that's the biggest impact I've seen personally. I also am very aware, that there are a lot of providers who have not gotten access to the content that we offer. The tone that we set, the affirming tone, these truths shall be self-evident. The way we interact with community, the way we respect community, they're just something that we've put in there and said, this is how it's going to be. And if you don't like that, you probably aren't interested in being here. But we try to set the tone with our introductory documents we send out to speakers, like, you better, learn how to speak about our community correctly before you come in. And we've had some older providers who haven't gotten the memo, and we've had to sort of talk about, well, I don't think we can let them back. Sure, they're an expert in this field, but if they don't know how to talk to us, they're not welcome anymore. But I think we've had a very positive impact, because a lot of the folks who come, some of them are social workers, some of them are mental health specialists, some of them are medical specialists. A lot of them have not had a lot of exposure. When you consider that up until the last few years, the average person going through med school, their total exposure to LGBT health was a 4-hour elective. It's not surprising that most people are not equipped for this. It is changing. I'm seeing, LGBT content added to curriculums in med schools, and more of it is becoming compulsory, but we've got a long way to go. And this is the ideal place for people to learn this stuff, especially if they're working in the field.
That's wonderful that you're providing this place for those things to come together, the people to learn and the doctors to learn from it, the healthcare professionals to learn at the same time. I love that. What are some of the things that you're most excited about for the event this year?
I'll be honest, the job is so big that it's hard to be really excited about it. But I'm building, for me personally, I'm building on a lot of things that we set in motion last year. We were in competition with a large number of virtual conferences last year, as pretty much everyone at that point had realized that virtual was what was possible. So that it did affect attendees. But we started to build those relationships, and I'm really excited about the payoff that's going to come from those relationships. Everybody from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which sets the standards of care that all the medical providers actually use as the basis for their practices, is aware of us now. US Path, which is the US subsidiary, is aware of us now. And we're reaching out directly to leadership in those organizations and saying, come and talk to us. We're reaching out to advocacy organizations like the Human Rights Campaign that has had a presence prior, but mostly from a supportive standpoint rather than a presenting standpoint. The ACLU, we're inviting them to come and talk. We're inviting Lambda Legal to come and talk. We're inviting the people doing the work, whether it be medical or advocacy or parent support or education. We're inviting the best minds to come and talk to our audience at the conference. Now, I don't know how many of them will actually come, but we have pretty good relationships with a lot of top people. And just the fact that we're reaching out to these folks, I think, is amazing. And this year in particular, we're reaching out to more people in higher positions of authority than ever before. So that's what excites me, the potential of what we can offer.
What are some of the key things that are offered specifically for the community?
So that's varied a lot. Again, the lived experience keynotes, I think, are aspirational. So that's a pretty big deal. We now have at least 4 of them that are community focused. And up until recently, all of the surgical content was really intended for a community audience. We have one particular surgeon who does 2 90-minute presentations on our Saturday, focused in each session. One is on masculinizing surgeries, all of them, and the other is on feminizing surgeries, all of them. And that's been a very, it's not new, but it's a high point. And the surgeon herself is a community member. So, we have the added benefit of that. We actually specifically try to get as many professional community members to speak as possible. Some of the other content, we have what we call community-only events that are either restricted to community members or, in some cases, specific segments of the community, such as like a top surgery show and tell. It's intended primarily for transmasculine individuals, where people from our community show off their chests. That's something that I know the person who set that up personally. That's something that started out locally and is now gotten a bigger audience. We tend to have a lot of intersectional content. We are essentially showcasing people from across the community, and specifically keynotes from Black, Indigenous, or otherwise trans people of color. We want to raise up those voices. And so we actually put a limit on the number of non-BIPOC people in our keynotes and in our presentations. We also try to reach, a variety of different topics. Some of the presentations are applicable to a general audience. Some are very specific to medical providers, but still community members can learn from them. But the community content tends to be about things like, let me think of some other examples, self-defense, how to be safe in a protest, and other practical things. It really varies. We haven't had a set of programming, and I'm not as familiar with some of those programs because I largely leave the bulk of the community content up to our community partners. But as I said, we all contribute something.
We got some questions primed here by Justice that she wants for sound bites. So this is a conference that needs the support of others. You're not charging anything from community members. So a big part of it is relying on sponsors. What are some of the key things that sponsors get out of supporting an event like this and being part of this?
Our conference is a prime way for corporate and other entities that support the LGBT community, specifically the gender diverse community, to really step up and say, I'm willing to put my name and some money towards this goal and be seen as a supporter of our community. We're very particular, much like our Pride organizations in Pittsburgh, about going after people and sponsors who have a good relationship with our community. We're not just going to take anybody's money. And there are multiple levels of sponsorship. So we really we offer individuals the opportunity to be a part of this at whatever level makes them feel comfortable. We don't have a ton of sponsors, but we could potentially, get more. And I think it's that commitment to the community, whether it's in your employees or just the way you interact with the community in general. That's what we look for, and this is the opportunity to actually show it, to show that you mean business.
Do you do any work with companies that are sort of on the fence? They don't have a great track record, but you think that they have something to offer the community if they kind of learned a little bit, and so you go in and help them with that in some way?
Specific to the conference, not so much. We tend to target sponsors based on who we feel is already meeting those goals, and also effectively who the committee knows, which is why the more people that are involved, the greater our reach. Um, that kind of work does happen, but that's outside the scope of the conference. We were considering doing some content specifically for corporate, such as HR departments in corporate, education around how they could prepare for trans employees, how they could, handle transition in the workplace. I don't believe that we've been able to provide that content this year, but that's one of the examples of something we could have done through the conference. I have colleagues who actually specifically go out and talk to corporations, and do education for corporate as their sort of prime job. We're all, there are a lot of people who do this kind of education. Mine is focused on medical providers and staff, but we've all also done, school boards and school systems, community organizations that want to know more. There are quite a lot of us in Pittsburgh alone, and you can imagine how many around the country. So we are actually trying to have an education educators track this year. That's something that we've had a little bit of content, but we really want to go all in, and we want to build additional sort of categories alongside our core medical, behavioral, and mental health, community content.
Mm-hmm. So if somebody works for a company that, they're part of the community and they feel that the company is either particularly good about supporting LGBT plus employees, or thinks that, it's a level of outreach that company should be doing, how do they reach out to you to support and sponsor the conference?
So at this point, there are a couple of avenues, but really it's talk to us. We have a primary email address, which I don't have available right now, but I think we can get that. I think it's TransPride PGH at Gmail, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Just by simply emailing them, or I think we add my contact information at some point as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that you want, I can put in here. We have just in your bar there that has your name and pronouns. I put the transpridepgh.org.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, going to the website will probably help you get to what you need, but we're perfectly happy to have people reach out to us directly, and it's typically either myself or Lynn's, and Lynn's tends to get the emails to the main address for the conference.
I'm sure if we asked nicely, a certain person in our chat who's been priming me with questions could probably drop in your appropriate contact information.
That would be great.
They ask a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
This is something along the lines of what I asked sort of generally, but they're getting to the specifics. So good luck on this one. What does this conference offer that's different from the Philly conference?
So I'm speaking very broadly here, and some of this is just community knowledge. I'm not going to say this is an absolute fact. But when we started planning this larger conference, we were generally aware that there was no direct community participation in the planning of the Philly conference. There had been community partners in the past, but they were no longer a part of that conference. That's not to say they don't have a lot of community accessible content there, but they don't have that community-centered approach that we have, where TransPride Pittsburgh is the primary, one of the primary collaborators, and we have several other organizations that are there in addition now. Also, our approach to allowing full access to all of our content. Organizations like the Philly conference, at least based on past years, they have that professional content, but it is segregated from their general content, which anyone can access And it's pricey. It's intended primarily for those professionals seeking continuing education. And while you could certainly, as a community member, pay to go into that track, it's significantly, expensive. And it assumes that you have a professional salary and is priced accordingly. I don't know of any other conferences that give full access the way that we do.
As the conference looks in the future to going to that an initial dream in 2020 of being an in-person conference, do you see it shifting where there will need to be an attendance, a price that you collect for the community as when it comes to attendance?
It really depends on what that looks like. I think the greater reach that we've been able to achieve with the virtual model means that virtual has to be a part of anything we do in the future. So that sort of leads us into the concept of hybrid. Um, the challenge of a large in person hybridized conference is, in addition to all the virtual costs, you have facility costs, potentially food costs, and that ramps things up exponentially. Um, I think our hope would be that, the sponsorship we get, the fees we get from medical providers, which are largely used to cover our expenses plus the fees for their continuing education certification, because that's not free. We have to pay for that. Um, would hopefully, still allow us to offer free access to community. If not, it would be a very low fee. For example, right now, we allow those professionals or students who do not require continuing education credits to attend for a very low fee. I believe it's something like $10 a day or $25 for the full 3-day conference. That is nothing. It's there has to be some remuneration there, but it's a very low bar. And if we were to charge, it would be something like that. It would be very, very low. That's how but it's an order of magnitude if we go back to a larger in-person event. When we were planning in 2020 for the in-person event, we went from a budget in 2019 of about $3,500. Again, a lot of the time was all of our professionals volunteered their time, all of our presenters volunteered their time, to 100 grand just for facilities and food alone. So it's a big, big jump. And it would require much greater levels of sponsorship. So we haven't really, I see it as a challenge, but we haven't really gotten to that point yet. And I think something that we're trying this year may persist in some form going forward, which is rather than have the single large physical event, have some smaller physical locations around the country, allowing people to have that in-person experience in multiple locations without having to all congregate in one.
Interesting. And the selfish question, what are you most excited about in the partnership between the Transverse and TransPride Pittsburgh?
Well, thanks to Justice, who is, I believe, still in the audience. It was Justice who brought the idea that this would be a collaboration that was worth looking into. And while we've had a lot of reach through the channels that we typically use, which is local community, social media for local community, and some of these international trans health channels where, there are a lot of community members, but it's a very select, not everybody is that interested in healthcare. We've reached a certain portion of the community. With the Transverse, I think we are able to reach the community in a much more general way. And if there's content that we have to offer that appeals to people, they will now know about it. I mean, the work that Transverse is doing to sort of unite the community in social media and through broadcast is something that we never imagined before this relationship. And I think we will be able to reach more people and take that sort of encapsulated experience within the conference and spread it beyond just that 3-day period. Um, you know, we've talked about opportunities to have speakers and or keynotes, do special sessions for the Transverse. We've talked about, broadcasts of some of the content on the days. These are things that Emily, you're well aware of, but I think it's the potential that as both the Transverse grows and we grow and the knowledge of what we're doing grows, we'll be able to reach a much larger and larger audience over time. And ideally, that everybody who's doing this work and everybody who has had to access healthcare in the country and beyond will know about the TransPride Conference. That's the goal.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm very excited about it, and I think, like you said, it's something where both organizations can help each other with awareness and spreading the word. And yeah, I love that. You've already done so much to expand out of just Pittsburgh itself, and this partnership allows us to the potential of taking it global and expanding it, out into more communities and all of that. So we're very excited to be able to be part of this and working with you on such a wonderful cause.
No, we're really excited about this too.
Thank you, Justice. I flubbed all of my lines, but I feel like when you're putting the video together, you won't need me asking the question as part of the video, so it's fine. Does anybody else in the audience have any other questions? We've gone through, I think, everything we needed to do as they're thinking of those and trying to come up with something else to ask you in the last minutes here. Is there anything else that you're doing or that you're working on specifically that you'd like to talk about or plug in any way?
Well, I guess I just want to touch briefly on what motivates me. Um, Ever since I helped co-found that program, the TransPride Pittsburgh program, which is sort of defunct. COVID kind of killed it because it was an in-person volunteer peer support program. The goals of that organization were essentially to take lived experience and improve the quality of care and access to care for our community in healthcare. And that's what motivates me to this day. I pursue that in my job. I pursue that through this conference. I pursue that in my advocacy. And I believe the future is more trans people in healthcare. And, we have several barriers to care. While there are more and more professionals getting through college and university and med school, there's still so many community members who do not have that opportunity. And I don't think you need that academic foundation to be useful. And so, one of the ideas that I'm particularly promoting, along with some other people that I work with around the country, is the idea of trans people being involved in the community navigation role. That's technically my job title, but in particular, care navigation, patient navigation. It's sort of an outshoot of the peer support model where you have somebody walk you through the healthcare experience to make sure that all those rough edges that exist are smoothed off, and you curate that experience. Better yet, to have community members part of the institution doing that work from inside. And this is not a novel idea. There are community navigators all across the country in various organizations, but not every organization, obviously. And every time that there is a trans person on the ground, be it in the insurance companies, be it in the healthcare systems, things change for the better. And so that's sort of my goal, is to promote that idea, to get more people involved, to find ways to bring community members who have an interest in doing this work and supporting each other into the institutions, getting them decent paying jobs, and providing that lived experience knowledge built on training and other things that we provide directly to the community, for the community. It's the dual role of being there for us and educating through our own personal experiences at the same time, everybody around you.
Wonderful. It's very important, that's for sure. Justice is asking in chat that you plug our musical friend, Venus de Mars, and the fact that All the Pretty Horses has an LP about to drop. Is that something you'd care to plug for a minute?
Sure. So my partner and I, Michaela, actually recruited Venus de Mars, who is a Minnesota local, um, and a punk musician who came out in the 80s, I think, or maybe early 90s, formed the band All the Pretty Horses as one of our keynotes last year, one of the musical keynotes. And so she came and she spoke about her personal experience and how things have changed so drastically from when she was first out and could not get ahead at some point, hit in a ceiling of sorts, an impenetrable ceiling because of being trans back in the day. This is long before bands like Against Me and some of the much more successful trans musicians of today. Literally, they would say to her, "Are you really sort of attached to this trans thing? Because if you get rid of that, we can sign you." Um, it sort of became a personal mission of ours to do everything we can to get Venus and her band better known. And so, yes, she has an album coming out. I believe it will be available in early June. And getting to have her as a keynote, and she did perform a number as part of that keynote, was very important to us. Uh, we're hoping, and I think there are plans for Venus to be a guest on this show at some point, and possibly even some musical concert material. I don't know where we are in that, but we've personally facilitated, shall we say, Venus coming to Pittsburgh for our Pride event this year. Um, we have, as one of the headliners. So Venus is an amazing human being, a lovely, lovely person who has, like many of us, struggled a lot to reach the sort of acclaim and success that she is due. And I think she'd be a great guest for you. And I think anyone who is inclined towards punk rock and trans-related themes should potentially find out more. And I'm sure there'll be more information because she is going to be a guest on the show, as far as I know. But
Absolutely, yes.
it's I'm really sort of invested in music. I sing myself, not professionally, but I sing, and so I've become very fascinated with trans musicians. And when I see somebody who should be a household name and isn't, I just feel like we need to do something.
Yeah, we've had a lot of good luck recently bringing on some great musicians that are doing wonderful things and getting to showcase them a little bit here. We haven't gotten to the level of doing a concert yet. We've gotten a couple live things played on the show with decent audio. But yeah, something that was really well produced as far as a concert on the channel is something we're definitely looking forward to. I don't know if you know some of the people we have had on the show. Robin Shakedown was a very recent guest.
Yes, I saw some of that myself. Yeah.
Jen Does Stuff, Jen Wemling, and Laser Milena Weber from the Double Clicks, which is a fun sisters band, one of whom is non-binary trans, and they've written a play that the album got into the I forget, I think the top 10 of the Billboard cast charts. Maybe it was even top 5. Correct me if you know it in the chat, but yeah, that's something we're definitely looking forward to. It would be really awesome to do both here on the channel and hopefully live. I would love to be there for a trans rock concert at TransPride Pittsburgh, and then afterwards bring the folks on for a chat for the audience. Because you know me, I love interviewing folks.
We talked about putting something together, especially when we were in lockdown. But we have a lot going on, so
Yeah, you do.
maybe Transverse is the group that pulls things together in the end. That would be great.
Yeah, that is definitely my focus. I am very excited for this to become an in-person conference again because I have a lot of great ideas for fun content we can provide for the community side, and of course all of our cis allies that are able to attend and watch would definitely get something out of it as well. And I just love that aspect of it. Yeah, we are out of time for tonight. Alicyn, thank you so much for coming on, sharing so much of your story, and for being such a wonderful light for the community and all of the work you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope your viewers have too.
I'm sure they have. We've getting some great things. Thank you for sharing your inspirational story with us and for all the work you're doing with Trans Pride. We'll definitely explore the conference, says one of our people in chat. So you're doing great work. I am very excited to work with you and keep it going forward. So